All right, so in Elijah's life, there were some events that occurred that led up to what you actually studied this morning. So I want us to go back and pick those up, because we see from Elijah an individual that God had showed himself faithful. And yet Elijah still ended up in the frame of mind that he ended up in. So I want us to go back and look at just everything that God had done, and yet still how Elijah ended up where he was. So let's start chapter 16, and I want to begin in verse 29. And we're going to read through this. We may stop and visit along the way, but let's start reading in verse 29 of chapter 16, 1 Kings. It says, "In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him." Now, how would you like that to be your obituary? He done evil in the sight of the Lord, more so than anyone else before him. That'd be a great thing to have written about you for the rest of your life, right? That people 4,000 years later are still reading. So this guy, we have to understand, this guy is not doing a good job at this point, but yet he is the leader. So verse 31, "And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria." Now, what is wrong with him doing what we just read? What's wrong with him worshiping Baal? What's wrong with him building this altar unto Baal?
False God.
False God, okay. Do we have any false gods in our life today?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we do. So we have to be careful. Hopefully you've not built an altar to him, though. Now, what makes it be wrong for him to build an altar to this false god and to worship him?
God said not to.
What's the very first commandment? What's that? No other gods before me. And he is now bordered on putting him, and actually did put him in front of the one true God. So that's the problem. It's also the problem in our life when we start putting things in front of God. Whether we build an altar to him or not, when we start taking them in as idols or false gods, and you may not think you have any in your life, but about the moment that you think you don't have any, you better be careful, because you probably do. And they can sneak up on you without you actually realizing it. So think about those things in your life as you, especially things that you pay a whole lot of attention to and you give a whole lot of time to, because those can be false gods without you even realizing that they are. All right, verse 32, "He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him." That's also a great thing to have written about you. "In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun." Chapter 17, "Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. And the word of the Lord came to him, Depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook Cherith, that is east of the Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook, and after a while the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. Now who was it that said, there will be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word? Elijah actually spoke it, but who actually told him? God, right? So this is God's word. Elijah was, as we know, a prophet, speaking God's word to what's supposed to be God's people. But we find that they've drifted from that at this point. So Elijah's told them there's not going to be dew, there's not going to be rain for years until you hear from God again. Now, why had God done that? Did God just say, you know, I'm going to make these people suffer for a little while because they've got too comfortable? Is that what God does?
They turned away from him.
Yeah, they had turned away. Now, was God, since they turned away, was God just going to punish them and just say, hey, if this is the way you're going to act, this is what I'm going to do? Is that what God intended to do?
He did, don't try to bring them back.
Yeah. We have to understand, and when we look at the Bible, that everything we see God do is with the intention of bringing His people back into a relationship with Him. It is not to say, hey, you done wrong, I'm going to whip you and I'm going to leave you out in the cold. It's a method for Him to try and bring them back. We talked last Sunday about the discipline that parents have for children should be, with every effort, it should be to bring them into a relationship with God. It is to teach and to train them about who God is. Every discipline measure that a parent does with a child is to let them know that God is there and He wants to be active in their life. God is now with His people in Old Testament. He is trying to show them that He wants to be active in their life, and He's trying to bring them back to Him. And so He's trying to get their attention here by doing this. Now look at what God is doing with Elijah, because has Elijah done anything wrong at this point? No. Elijah's just speaking what God told him to speak. He's not done anything wrong. So is Elijah going to have to suffer through this the same as the other people? Okay. Well, what happened before that? Yeah. Notice what God does. Elijah, I want you to speak this word. I know it's going to make it hard on you, but here's what I'm going to do for you. I want you to go to this place I tell you to go, and I want you to hang out there because I've got my creation that's actually going to bring you food and make sure you got water. This is the God that Elijah served. Elijah was being obedient to. God's saying, because you're being obedient to me, here's what I'm going to do for you, Elijah. Now, the brook dries up. I get that. But at the same time, that was some time after he had spoken what God told him to speak. So then look at verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So the brook dries up, so now what's God going to do? Just say, sorry, Elijah, you're on your own? He's got another way, right? He's prepared a widow woman that is now going to take care of Elijah. So verse 10, so he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Is this woman in a bad place at this point in time? Yeah. God has sent Elijah to go to her, and he's told Elijah that I have her prepared to do what?
Feed
to feed him. In other words, Elijah, I know that everything's dried up at the brook. I'm going to take you now to a place where you're going to get fed, okay? But notice this widow is now about to be out of food. Now, I want you to notice Elijah's reaction, though. This is really important as we think through what happens in his life. So Elijah said to her, verse 13, "Do not fear, go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward make something for yourself and your son." What does Elijah have confidence in at this point in time? God's going to take care of him, right? Does he know how? Maybe not the details of it, but he knows God's going to take care of it. God's told him, go to this widow. I have her prepared. She's going to feed you. The widow's saying, hey, all I've got is a little handful of stuff. I'll fix it, but then we're done. And Elijah says, go fix it for me and then make something for yourself because it's going to be there. Now, this is the confidence that Elijah has in God at this point. Verse 14, "For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth." In other words, God's just going to keep filling it over and over again. You don't have to worry about it. It's going to be there. Elijah's speaking this to her now. "The jar of flour shall not be spent, the jug of oil shall not be empty till the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth." Verse 15, "And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah." Verse 17, "After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, 'What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son.' And he said to her, 'Give me your son.' And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged, and he laid on him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, 'O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son?' Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, 'O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again.' And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, 'See, your son lives.' And the woman said to Elijah, 'Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth.'" Do we see Elijah maybe have just a tiny bit of doubt here at a moment? Notice he takes the child, he goes up into his room, and he says, "God, have you brought me here just for him to die?" A little bit of doubt. But then, has he truly lost confidence in God at this point? No. Because he still cries out to him, right? He cries out and he says, "God, will you bring him back to life?" And God does. He's faithful. And so he carries him back downstairs, and then notice the words of encouragement, which should be confidence builder for Elijah. "I know that you are now" what? "A man of God." Look at verse 8 or chapter 18 now. "After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, 'Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth.' So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, 'Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals.' So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, Is it you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you. And when they would say, He is not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. All right, is this guy, Obadiah, in a great place right now? No, he's saying, hey, it's great to see you, Elijah, but I know probably what's going to happen. I'm going to go tell Ahab where you are, but God's going to move you somewhere else, and then Ahab's going to come to where I tell you that you are. He's not going to find you. He's going to kill me because he thinks I'm going to be lying to him. So let's see what Elijah says now. Verse 13. Has it not been told you, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah's here, and he will kill me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. In other words, have confidence. I'm not going anywhere. You go tell Ahab, I'm here. I'm going to be there. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, Is it you, you troubler of Israel? Now, why is he calling him a troubler of Israel? Yeah, he's blaming the drought on him. All Elijah was doing was being the messenger. He was sharing what God told him to share, and yet everybody's upset. Well, not everybody. Ahab is upset with him. The pretty important guy in the area is upset with him about this. And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. What does Elijah do once Ahab starts blaming him? Does he start arguing with him? He tells him an action item to do, but what's he telling before that? He states truth, is what I was getting at, but you're right. This is what he done. He said, It's not me, but it's you, Ahab. You've put the people in this situation because you have ignored God and you've turned to a false God. So it's not me, but it's you. Here's what we're going to do. Because he doesn't just blame him and then walk away. He gives him a solution to the problem. He says, you go gather up all these false prophets and let's figure this thing out. It's not going to do any good to stand there and argue with him about it. So he says, here's the action. Now understand, God is behind Elijah in this, okay? God's prompting him on what he needs to be saying, what he needs to be doing. But this is what Elijah says. He says, it's not me. You can blame me all you want, but you're the one that led the people away from God. Now go gather up all of them and let them have a meeting. So notice verse 20. So Ahab sent all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Who does Elijah have confidence in? God. Is he worried that this Baal guy is going to cause him any problems? No. His confidence is in God at this point, okay? And the people did not answer him a word. Verse 22, then Elijah said to the people, even I only am left a prophet of the Lord. but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, He is God. In other words, Elijah says, let's just see who answers when we call out to Him. Okay? Now, why does He let the other people choose which bull they have? Yeah, you take your pick. I don't care what you give me, because God's going to answer. Okay? Verse 24. You call upon the name of your God, I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, He is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. Why do you think he threw in there, for you are many?
They outnumbered him.
They outnumbered him. But to God, does it matter how many people there are? No. How many times do we read throughout the Old Testament that the Israelites are outnumbered tremendously, and yet God still takes care of everything He says He's going to take care of? So today, no matter how small the population of Christianity in the United States gets, should we be worried? Has God ever needed us to fight for Him? No. He just needs us to believe in Him. Verse 26, and they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is I cannot say the word. Say it for me. Relieving. Thank you. Couldn't get that in my mind. Relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. Do we have people today that are so led astray that they may not literally do this, but they're doing this to themselves spiritually? They're believing in something so strongly that is so wrong that they are harming themselves so badly, and yet they don't even know they're doing it. It's what happens when we become disillusioned. It's what happens when we start going down the path of a false god, and we start placing trust in a false god, and then we let ourselves just kind of forget that there is one God and only one God. And so they find themselves actually cutting themselves with swords and lances. Blood's gushing out. Look at verse 29. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Thinking about the subject matter this morning in your Sunday school class of depression, there are people that are calling out to all kinds of things today for help. And they're looking in so many wrong places. And yet they find themselves get in this situation where they are so distraught, they're not beyond help, but they are in such a bad way that they're doing things that is harming themselves even more so than what they already were. And they think they're turning to the right place. And yet all the while there's a God that wants them to reach out to Him. And we have that good news, by the way. We have the information, the knowledge of that God. We just have to get it to Him somehow. But we can't do that by doing what we commonly say sometimes and just say, well, I'm going to pray for you. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to pray for them. That's great. But folks, God placed us on this earth and He placed us around certain people for a reason. It's because they need to hear from us. Elijah was the prophet. We're not prophets today. But Elijah was a messenger from God to these people, and he had the message that they needed to hear, that there is one God and one God only, and He can take care of all things. He's the same God that you and I serve today, and He can take care of all problems today as well. It's not as simple as just handing them a Bible and saying, here it is. We got to be there, and we got to be willing to get into the trenches with them, so to speak. Let's read on. Verse 30, then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the son of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seths of seed. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Now, why was he having them pour water on this thing? There'd be no doubt that when God, now again, Elijah has the confidence God's fixing to do this. I mean, he's even just, this is almost like he's making fun of them. Not saying he's doing that, but this is kind of a little bit of that salt in the wound kind of thing. Like, you couldn't get your God to do this, so let me show you what my God can do. He hasn't poured water on the, I mean, this thing, y'all know, wet wood doesn't burn well, right? So he hasn't poured water all over this thing. And then notice verse 36, and at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. In other words, it's not me doing any of this. I don't want anyone to think that it is. I want them to know that you are Lord. I'm just serving you. Same attitude that you and I should have today. Verse 37, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. And Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of a rushing of rain. So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he bowed himself down to the earth, and he put his face between his knees, and he said to his servant, go up now, look toward the sea. And he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. And he said, go again 7 times. And at the 7th time he said, behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea. And he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you. And in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment, and he ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. What has Elijah just witnessed in what we've read over the last 2 chapters? The awesomeness of God. Yeah, the awesomeness of God. A mighty miracle, you might say. I mean, look at what happened to the altar. This wasn't just that God set it on fire. Like it's an interesting way it describes it. Licked up the water that was in the trench all around it. God was showing there is going to be no doubt I am God. Now, this was Elijah was not telling God what to do. Elijah was just a messenger. But this is all at the hand of Elijah as well. If that makes, you know what I mean by that? He's not the guy telling God what to do, but Elijah's the guy that's announcing all this. Someone had to do it. Elijah was there to do it. In other words, Elijah's getting to be a part of this. The same way that you and I get to be a part of someone coming to know Jesus Christ today. When we are willing to put ourselves out there, as Elijah was, and to say, go get Ahab. I know he's not happy with me. I know he wants to kill me. But go get him and tell him that I'm here. And then when Ahab started in on him, what did Elijah say? Hey, it's not me. It's because you've turned away from the Lord. Same message that a lot of people need to hear today. This has nothing to do with me. It's that you're in a sinful state. You're not right with the Lord, but I want you to know there's a God that loves you, and I want you to know that that God is the only God, and He is the one that you need to serve. Elijah's getting to witness all of this stuff. You would think a guy that has seen all of this happen, would you not think that Elijah would be like on this high that he would never come down from? Like he'd be floating on the clouds, right? If you get to be a part of this, could you imagine if you go out in the parking lot and you put together this little fire and you say, you know, let's pour water all over it. And we're going to build a trench and let's just fill the trench up with water. Matter of fact, just put some of the wood in the water. But then, you know, God tells you miraculously that He's going to set it on fire, okay? And so then you say, okay, God, we've done it all. You set it on fire. And then God does it. And you're standing there and you just see this all happen. Would you not be floating on the cloud a little bit? Some of y'all are, I can tell by your face, you'd still be sitting back there on the pew just going, okay, God, what are you going to do next? Some of you need to be amazed by God because He is an amazing God.
Amen.
You would be on cloud nine. The same way that the shepherds, we just got done studying this, the shepherds were amazed when the angels appear and they start saying glory to God in the highest. And the shepherds are amazed and they start going and they see the baby and then they leave and they're full of joy. You remember the song we sing, Joy Unspeakable? That's what you would be if God done that. Wouldn't we think that that's where Elijah would be as well? We would like to think that we would be there. You'd like to think that Elijah was there. Look at chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. In other words, this is a death threat. She kind of puts an end date on it. By this time tomorrow it's going to happen. Verse 3, then he was afraid and he arose. Is fear from the Lord, by the way? Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And we'll stop there for now. Elijah has just witnessed some amazing things. And yet all of a sudden he goes into this state of mind. It'd be better off if I was dead. How could he go there? He was tired? That physical tiredness does do a lot of things to us, right?
Kevin, a lot of times people will come to church, everything is going just good, you really had a good day. The next day something comes up that gives you a shock. You should still have that joy, because it's still the same God was there when you was on the mountain.
Sometimes we have a short memory, don't we? Okay, sometimes we have a long memory. And what's our long memory usually remember? Good things or bad? Someone said it, bad things. What is our short term usually? Yeah. Why is that? Do we like to dwell on the bad stuff more than we do the good? Sometimes we do. Sometimes we like to wallow in our sorrows for a while because we want people to feel bad for us. I'm not saying that's what Elijah was doing here. He's not looking for people to start patting him on the back and saying, hey, it's going to be okay. That's not what Elijah was looking for. Sometimes that is something we do, we can do. But Elijah had forgotten all that God had done at this moment, and he had forgotten that God could take care of him if he would just sit back and let God work. The same way that when the ravens quit bringing him food and the brook dried up, God said, I got a widow prepared for you. She's going to take care of you. You're going to have something to eat. It's all going to be okay. God had this worked out as well. But sometimes, and I think Don said it just a minute ago, we see great things happen. Maybe we leave church on what we might term an emotional high. And then Monday happens, and that emotional high is gone. Maybe it's because we forget that God's an amazing God. Maybe it's because we let our emotions have too much control on us. Because foundationally, we need to know that God is an amazing God, not just emotionally. I'm not saying it's wrong to know that emotionally He's a great God, but foundationally, we need to have the principles within our life to where we know He is a great God, whether we've seen Him do something miraculous or not. Now, y'all know, and if you don't, you're blind. But over the last, I'm going to say 6 months, God has done some amazing things within the church. And we stand, and I hope you do, but you've heard me say it, I think, at least, that we are so thankful for what God has done, and it is all Him. And so right now, because we're seeing some amazing things, we're saying those kind of things. But if this church, over the last 6 months, would have went backward about 20 or 40 people, would we still be saying the same thing? Because we should be. Because He's the same God then as He is now. And I'm going to tell you, enjoy the good times, because they're not always going to happen. In your personal life, enjoy the good times that God gives you, because they're not always going to happen. God's going to bring you through some things that you need to learn from. Elijah needed to learn from this situation, and God was bringing him through that in order for him to learn. And He'll bring us through that same thing as well. But don't lose sight that no matter what situation you're in, God is still good. And He is still the only God. He is still an amazing God. And He is still the same God as He was when the good things were happening in your life as well. You're just in a different phase of life. But God will see you through just as faithfully as He did in the good times. So let's not fall victim to what Elijah did. Let's remember how good God has been, but let's know that even in a downtime, He is still good. Life is in His hands. We are here until He calls us home, and in no way, shape, or form should we take that into our own hands, but we should let Him have control of that. And we should just be faithful to serve Him and to follow Him and to give glory to Him no matter what situation we're in. Paul said it in the New Testament, didn't he? I've learned that whatever state, I'm going to paraphrase, it's the MO version. I've learned that whatever state I'm in to give God praise, whether it be good, whether it be bad. He is to receive all honor, glory, and praise. And I can be content in that because I know that He is a good God. Pray with me if you would. Dear God, I'm thankful for what you have done. Lord, I look back 7 years ago and I had no clue what you would do. And while I, and we might say the rest of the church, has stumbled through this last 7 years, you have had a plan. And I praise you for it. And I pray that we never lose sight that it is you that have seen us through everything. Through the time we went through with COVID when we just didn't really know what was going to happen, you were faithful. Through the times when we've lost loved ones that we did not expect to lose. Lord, you've been faithful. And Lord, in our own personal life, aside from just the life of the church, in our own personal lives, you've seen us through many things. And while maybe there's times where we wish things would have been different than what they were, Lord, we know that you have the best plan and the best intentions in mind for us all. And so we trust you with that. Lord, I pray that we always are reminded of your faithfulness to us. And so, Lord, in times when we let our emotions get the best of us, when we feel down, when we're tired, Lord, I just pray that you would bring to our remembrance your goodness in our life, even when we did not deserve it. Even before we loved you sometimes. You've been so good to us. So, Lord, as we go forward, we finish today up, we go into tomorrow. Lord, help us to wake up with the idea and the thought that we want to be your missionary in your world and just serve you in whatever way that you would desire for us to do it, so that others might know who you are. In the same way that Elijah opened the eyes of people that he was around, Lord, let us just be the witness of who you are. Let us allow you the opportunity to work in people's lives. And Lord, let us not stand in the way. I pray it all in your Son's name, Jesus the Christ. Amen. We appreciate